Money is the warp of the world." "Yes." "Then what's the woof?" "Very much what one chooses," said Margaret. "It's something that isn't money. One can't say more." "Walking at night?" "Probably." "For Tibby, Oxford?" "It seems so." "For you?" "Now that we have to leave Wickham Place, I begin to think it's that. For Mrs. Wilcox it was certainly Howards End." One's own name will carry immense distances. Mr. Wilcox, who was sitting with friends many seats away, heard his, rose to his feet, and strolled along towards the speakers. "It's sad to suppose that places may ever be more important than people," continued Margaret. "Why, Meg? They're so much nicer generally. I'd rather think of that forester's house in Pomerania than of the fat Herr Forstmeister who lived in it." "I believe we shall come to care about people less and less, Helen. The more people one knows, the easier it becomes to replace them. It's one of the curses of London. I quite expect to end my life caring more for a place." Here Mr. Wilcox reached them. It was several weeks since they had met. "How do you do?" he cried. "I thought I recognized your voices. Whatever are you both doing down here?" His tones were protective. He implied that one ought not to sit out on Chelsea Embankment without a male escort. Helen resented this, but Margaret accepted it as part of the good man's equipment. "What an age it is since I've seen you, Mr. Wilcox. I met Evie in the Tube, though, lately. I hope you have good news of your son." "Paul?" said Mr. Wilcox, extinguishing his cigarette and sitting down between them. "Oh, Paul's all right. We had a line from Madeira. He'll be at work again by now." "Oh," said Helen, shuddering from complex causes. "I beg your pardon?" "Isn't the climate of Nigeria too horrible?" "Someone's got to go," he said simply. "England will never keep her trade overseas unless she's prepared to make sacrifices. Unless we get firm in West Africa, untold complications may follow. Now, tell me all your news." "Oh, we've had a splendid evening," cried Helen, who always woke up at the advent of a visitor. "We belong to a kind of club that reads papers, Margaret and I, all women, but there's a discussion after. This evening it was on how one ought to leave one's money, whether to one's family or to the poor, and if so, how. Oh, most interesting." The man of business smiled. Since his wife's death he had almost doubled his income. He was an important figure at last, a reassuring name on company prospectuses, and life had treated him very well. The world seemed in his grasp as he listened to the river Thames, which still flowed inland from the sea. So wonderful to the girls, it held no mysteries for him. He had helped to shorten its long tidal trough by taking shares in the lock at Teddington, and if he and the other capitalists thought good, some day it could be shortened again. With a good dinner inside him and an amiable but academic woman on either flank, he felt that his hands were on all the ropes of life, and that what he did not know could not be worth knowing. "Sounds a most original entertainment," he exclaimed, and laughed in his pleasant way. "I wish Evie would go in for that sort of thing, but she hasn't the time. She's taken to breed Aberdeen terriers. Jolly little dogs." "I expect we'd be better doing the same, really." "We pretend we're improving ourselves, you see," said Helen a little sharply, for the Wilcox glamour is not the kind that returns, and she had bitter memories of the days when a speech such as he had just made would have impressed her favourably. "We suppose it's a good thing to waste an evening once a fortnight over a debate, but, as my sister says, it may be better to breed dogs." "Not at all. I don't agree with your sister. There's nothing like a debate to teach one quickness. I often wish I'd gone in for them when I was a youngster. Would have helped me no end." "Quickness?" "Yes, quickness in argument. Time after time I've missed scoring a point because the other man has had the gift of gab and I haven't. Oh, I believe in these discussions." The patronizing tone, thought Margaret, came well enough from a man who was old enough to be their father. She had always maintained that Mr. Wilcox had a charm. In times of sorrow or emotional, his inadequacy had pained her, but it was pleasant to listen to him now, and to watch his thick brown moustache and high forehead confronting the stars. But Helen was nettled. The aim of their debates, she implied, was truth. "Oh, yes, it doesn't much matter what subject you take," said he. Margaret laughed and said, "But this is going to be far better than the debate itself." Helen recovered herself and laughed too. "No, I won't go on," she said. "I'll just put our special case to Mr. Wilcox." "About Mr. Bast, yes, do. He'll be more lenient to a special case. But, Mr. Wilcox, do first light another cigarette. It's this. We've just come across a young fellow who's evidently very poor, who seems What's his profession?" "Clerk." "What in?" "Do you remember, Margaret?" "Porphyrion Fire Insurance Company." "Oh, yes. The nice people who gave Aunt Julia a new hearthrug. He seems interesting, in some ways very, and one wishes one could help him. He's married to a wife whom he doesn't seem to care for much. He likes books, and what one may roughly call adventure, and if he had a chance... But he is so poor. He lives a life where all the money is apt to go on nonsense and clothes. One is so afraid that circumstances will be too strong for him, and that he will sink. Well, he got mixed up in our debate. He wasn't the subject of it, but it seemed to bear on his point. Suppose a millionaire died and desired to leave money to help such a man. How should he be helped? Should he be given £300 a year direct, which was Margaret's plan? Most of them thought this would pauperize him. Should he and those like him be given free libraries? I said no, he doesn't want more books to read, but to read books rightly. My suggestion was that he be given something every year towards a summer holiday. But then there is his wife, and they said she would have to go too. Nothing seemed quite right. Now what do you think? Imagine that you were a millionaire and wanted to help the poor. What would you do? Mr. Wilcox, whose fortune was not so very far below the standard indicated, laughed exuberantly. "My dear Miss Schlegel, I will not rush in where your sex has been unable to tread. I will not add another plan to the numerous excellent ones that have been already suggested. My only contribution is this. Let your young friend clear out of the Porphyrion Fire Insurance Company with all possible speed." "Why?" said Margaret. He lowered his voice. "This is between friends. It'll be in the receiver's hands before Christmas. It'll smash," he added, thinking that she had not understood. "Dear me, Helen, listen to that! And he'll have to get another place." "Will have. Let him leave the ship before it sinks. Let him get one now." "Rather than wait to make sure?" "Decidedly." "Why's that?" Again the Olympian laugh and the lowered voice. "Naturally, the man who's in a situation when he applies stands a better chance, is in a stronger position than the man who isn't. It looks as if he's worth something. I know by myself, this is letting you into state secrets, it affects an employer greatly. Human nature, I'm afraid." "I hadn't thought of that," murmured Margaret, while Helen said, "Our human nature appears to be the other way around. We employ people because they're unemployed. The bootman, for instance." "And how does he clean the boots?" "Not well," confessed Margaret. "There you are." "Then do you really advise us to tell this youth—" "I advise nothing," he interrupted, glancing up and down the embankment in case his indiscretion had been overheard. "I oughtn't to have spoken, but I happen to know, being more or less behind the scenes. The Porphyrion's a bad, bad concern. Now, don't say I said so. It's outside the tariff ring." "Certainly I won't say. In fact, I don't know what that means." "I thought an insurance company never smashed," was Helen's contribution. "Don't the others always run in and save them?" "You're thinking of reinsurance," said Mr. Wilcox mildly. "It's exactly there that the Porphyrion is weak. It has tried to undercut, has been badly hit by a long series of small fires, and it hasn't been able to reinsure. I'm afraid that public companies don't save one another for love." "Human nature, I suppose," quoted Helen, and he laughed and agreed that it was. When Margaret said that she supposed that clerks, like everyone else, found it extremely difficult to get situations in these days, he replied, "Yes, extremely," and rose to rejoin his friends. He knew by his own office seldom a vacant post and hundreds of applicants for it. At present no vacant post. "And how's Howard's End looking?" said Margaret, wishing to change the subject before they parted. Mr. Wilcox was a little apt to think that one wanted to get something out of him.